Hello and welcome to the 15-Minute Book Club. This is the show where we give an author 15 whole unedited minutes to convince you and us to buy their latest book. As ever, I'm Matt Bone. Hello. And I'm joined as ever by my friend, author and historian, Alex Churchill. Hello, Alex. Who have we got today?
So this is an exciting one because today we have one of the shortlisted authors from the Wolfson Prize, which was given out this week. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm Sarah Lodge, and I am Professor of 19th Century Literature and Culture at the University of St Andrews.
This is brilliant. So we're talking today about the mysterious case of the Victorian female detective. Matt, are you excited about this? This is
I am. Well, detectives I like. I like women, so this is two things that we should be going along with, and yeah, we're gonna get into this. So, right, if you've been paying attention to the show, you know I'm on timer duty, and you also know that I'm rubbish at this. So let's see how long we actually give Sarah to sell us on her book. Right, so Sarah, your 15 minutes begin now.
Well,
Okay.
hello. And I want to tell you that my book is full of hidden histories of real women detectives in the 19th century in Britain and America. Some of these women were working for the police. Some of them were working for private inquiry agencies, which they were also running themselves. And they were looking into shenanigans from corporate embezzlement to terrorism to adultery. So I'm offering you sexual shenanigans. I'm offering you political intrigue, and also feminist fun facts. In addition to real female detectives, we've also got the history of Victorian female detectives on the 19th century page and stage. These gun-toting, ball-busting, cross-dressing action heroines, the kind of Mayor of East Towns of their day. So this is a myth and reality book. It's about real women detectives and their fictional counterparts in the 19th century.
I love this. So we often ask people, first of all, like, what was your top line with the publisher? But how do you stumble at who was the first one you found where you thought, oh my God, this is a thing and I have to write about it?
It really started with the small lads, as many relationships do. And I found these two books in the British Library that had just been republished in 2012. They were both published in 1864 originally, The Female Detective and Revelations of a Lady Detective. And these were pulp fictions. They purported to be books that were by a female detective, that were kind of case books. They weren't really by female detectives. But in the intro to those books, it said, of course, there were no women detectives in 1864. And I said, I don't believe you. And that was what sent me then to the British Newspaper Archive and to looking for small ads. And lo and behold, I found them almost at once because there were a lot of them, particularly in London. There were lots of these private inquiry agencies.
That's a phrase I hadn't heard before, private inquiry agency. So is that like Victorian PI sort of establishment where, you'd go in, it'd be smoky, there'd be someone in a hat, only a much nicer hat this time?
Yes. I mean, not so much the smoky and the hat, but, these were often attended by women. And in fact, I suspect that women were their main clients because women were the people who were being mushroomed, who were being, kept in the dark in this period. And they didn't know where their husbands were straying. They often had other sort of family secrets of paternity, sometimes that they wanted to unearth, or inheritance, or maybe somebody in the family has actually stolen something. So women are being kept in the dark, and they go to the private inquiry agency to try and find answers.
What kind of women are doing this job? Who do they set up with men, or are they totally self-sufficient when they decide this is what they're going to do for a living?
It's a real mixture, but one of the main takeaways that I found interesting is a lot of them are working class. Why? Because actually, women can infiltrate, as servants very easily, but you can only play a servant convincingly if you actually come from the right class, because you're going to have to do the work while you're also doing the reconnaissance. So I found a lot of really gutsy women, working class women, who were working as private detectives in this period.
Is that, I suppose, they'll be less noticed in certain cases, as people be looking down their nose in certain ways if you're monitoring a situation and things like that.
Yeah, women are just less suspected in general, so they can also enter into a lot of places that would be difficult for a man. So if you're a police force and you're trying to catch a backstreet abortionist or an illegal fortune teller whose clients are women, you need a woman, otherwise you're not going to catch that person.
There, as well as women who have their own independent agencies and work for agencies, there are also women working side by side with the police, aren't there?
Yes, there are. I found, this is pretty extraordinary because the police tell us that, there are no female police constables really until the end of the First World War. But I found women working for the police from the 1840s onwards as female detective searchers within the station, but then also working outside the station. Well, I stumbled on this woman called Anne Lovesey, who was working for the police in Birmingham in Moore Street Station as a detective searcher in the station and outside the station. And this woman had a career of 36 years working for the police. So, women are actually part of the fabric of policing in the Victorian city. It's just that history kind of tore down the curtains.
That is quite a career. Why do you think women like that, who were part of the fiction, were just written out of a lot of the histories of policing at the time? Is it just because they're women and there was no point, he says, doing air quotes, in telling their stories? I
think it's a variety of motives. I mean, I think one is that these women are often being paid kind of piecemeal. They're kind of on what we would now call 0 hours contracts. So the police are very keen to artificially casualize these women's work. They don't want to give them a salary. They don't want to give them a pension. They need there to be women inside the station because, of course, women have to search female suspects, both for concealed items on their body and on their clothes, but also for marks of domestic violence and other things. They have to be able to take witness statements. They have to be able to testify in court. But the police do not want to pay women, to salary women, for as long as they can get away with, really.
Of course they don't.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm
got away with that up until recently.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you, what was the most outlandish case you found in your research?
I think my favourite case, partly because I was the only person ever to have dealt with it, is what I'm calling the case of the Leary Laird. This happens in Haddington, just outside Edinburgh, which is where I'm from, in 1897, and is a woman called, who under the alias of Clara Late, who goes to investigate mysterious occurrences at a country house called Colston Manor. All sorts of strange things have happened, from rat traps being sprung and eggs being smashed in the hen house to the Laird thinks that they're tampering with the post and getting to the servants. And we know all about this because the Laird actually sues the detective agency, which is called Steggles and Darling. And so it all goes to court and it becomes a sensation in Edinburgh in the 1890s. And it really is quite a sad case because I think actually I solved the case in that the Laird and his lady, I think she actually had syphilis and it's made her paranoid. And so the snake in the grass is actually her ex-husband, Robert Burke, who was an Anglo-Irish MP and not a nice man. And he'd infected her with syphilis and she was dying, as it turned out. And so Clara Late, whose real name, get this, is Clara Jolly Death, is the kind of private detective in the midst of all of this kind of aristocratic scandal in the country house, which is infested with rats.
There's a book series right there.
Yeah,
there really
definitely.
is. I would love this to be a drama series. Yeah.
Yeah, you should definitely be nagging your agent about TV rights and stuff for that case. You did mention as well domestic violence there, because there are funny capers in the book and there is highly entertaining stuff. And we'll get on to why this sort of generates a whole genre and entertainment as well. But you mentioned domestic violence. I find it really interesting that there's kind of already that awareness from the police that actually it might be better if it's a woman listening to another woman when it comes to talking about domestic violence. Do you find surprisingly enlightened attitudes to things like that women are involved in, or is it just sad?
A lot of the research was actually quite sad. I mean, there's some lovely stories of actress detectives and lots of fun material, but actually the constant background is women under threat from men. And the female detective on the stage, that's very much what she's doing, that it's always a male villain and it's always a female action heroine who is able to pass as a man. And that's how she's able to beat what is a really nasty wife killing plot, or sometimes putting a wife in a mental institution in order to get control of her property, her inheritance. That the female detective is the person who stands in the way of that kind of male abuse. And you can see why this was outrageously popular, that 4,000 people were packing into the Britannia Theatre in London's East End every night to watch Sarah Lane strut herself as the female detective, for the very same reason that they watch Jane Tennyson as prime suspect, because they really, really want men to get it in the neck, violent men. But it won't necessarily happen, certainly not for another 50 or 100 years, arguably not at all.
You said 4,000 people were packing into the theatre. So this I use genre loosely here, but this was something that really sort of caught the public's imagination at the time.
It really did. Yeah. And this is, well before Sherlock Holmes, because, there is this sort of male lineage that we're always taught about the detective's story, which goes Edgar Allan Poe, Dickens, Wilkie Collins, and then Sherlock Holmes. And actually, there's a whole alternative female tradition, which runs through the theatres. So these women playing the female detective, this is over 20 years before A Study in Scarlet, before Sherlock Holmes actually appears in 1887. Women are well established on the stage. And I would even argue that one of the first detective novels is Catherine Crowe's Susan Hopley, which is just before Edgar Allan Poe. So, women are there from the start, actually, in the detective tradition. It's just that male history has tended to erase their presence.
Are there female perpetrators as well?
Absolutely, yes. And one of the things I wanted to emphasize in the book is that women are not always on the side of the angels or on the side of other women, and that sometimes women are having it away. Like the wonderfully named Violet Wigglesworth, who claimed that the list of her lovers would stretch, all the way from Chiswick into town, basically. And Kate Easton, the actress detective, she gets her in an adultery suit. So, sometimes it can be that way round. But, some of these female detectives were actually also feminists. So, Antonia Moser, she's actually publishing kind of small ads in Votes for Women saying, to fellow feminists, if you need to see me, you can have a free consultation. Or she's spotting police knocks at kind of suffragette meetings and protests. So she's using her detective skills for the sisterhood. So it can happen either way.
Do you stay just in the UK, or do you broaden it out to female detectives elsewhere as well?
I do. I go to America in the final chapter and look at Kate Warne, who was particularly well known. She was a Pinkerton's detective, but actually becomes part of what is really the nascent Secret Service during the Civil War in America. But her there's a sort of hagiography of Kate Warne, and I wanted to expose what her life was really like, not what Alan Pinkerton, who was probably her lover, said about her. But there are also people like Isabella Goodwin, who was working for the NYCPD as a female detective. And if you look at all the newspapers, they say first female detective, but Isabella Goodwin herself says, actually, there are 50 women doing my job. It's just like in the UK that women are doing the work. They're just not actually getting the badge, and they're not getting the salary, until in Isabella Goodwin's case, 1912. But at that point, she said, no, she's actually done 500 cases already. Sorry, Alex.
No, I was just going to say, so Clive Cussler even really recently, so he did, before he died, he did the Isaac Bell stories, didn't he? Which was a Pinkerton detective set just before the First World War. And there's a female character in that is very much not just a hanger-on in the plot. She's an actual detective, isn't she?
Absolutely. No, women were absolutely necessary to all of these kinds of work. I mean, particularly work that involved people being in bed with other people, because after 1857 in Britain, suddenly we have the Divorce Act, which means that the middle classes can get a divorce. It's still not easy, but you can get a divorce. And that's, there's a kind of explosion of female detectives. And that boom is very much caused by the Gelignite of the Divorce Act.
Okay, so we're gonna get straight into Mr. Gammon here. We've had a little technical glitch, and by my math, we have about a minute to go. So, Alex.
Okay, so this one, I went looking at your reviews and I went looking for a real life Mr. Gammon and I found one. And his beef is that apparently these women seem to think that they were possessing wiles and gifts of perception that men simply didn't have. And then his beef continues because he says the author agrees. And he doesn't think that's anything to do with being female.
Well, Mr. Gammon and beef, I say it is. I say that women had skills and opportunities that men in this period really didn't have, that they were able to interview other women in a way that was under the radar. They were able to pose as servants, as cooks, as lodgers, as governesses. They were able to do all sorts of things, from searching women's bodies to dealing with infanticide and domestic violence that men couldn't do. And there really were female detectives in this period. So if you think it's not the case, you're wrong.
Time's up.
There we go.
That, Mr. Gammon.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the book's called The Mysterious Case of the Victorian Female Detective. You'd think the hint would be in the title, my dear Mr. Gammon, for that the author might just agree with the thesis that there were female
Seems to have come as a nasty surprise.
Surprised him. No, there was one review, because you always search through on Google, and I found somebody who was a lawyer who was just interested in legal history, and he said, "There's very little legal history in this book." I thought,
and
there was not a legal historian.
I don't know if it was the same Gammon or a different Gammon that turned around and said something along the lines of, "This just reads like a PhD thesis." And we joked before we started recording, didn't we? This person has clearly never read a PhD thesis.
No, really not.
Well, there we go. Sarah, thank you so much. Would you like to remind us, I have just done it, but it's always good to get the author to do it. What is the name of your book?
It's called The Mysterious Case of the Victorian Female Detective.
And we have links to that in our description for you to go grab it from our very own bookshop.org affiliates, which means Sarah gets paid, independent bookshops get supported, we get a little bit as well, and no money goes to phallic spaceship building weirdos. So there we are. If you'd like to stay with us to chat with Sarah, we have Patreon extra time, so you can join us on that. But to everybody else, thank you so much for joining us. We have been the 15-Minute Book Club, and until next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.